Let me take you back to 1995. A huge global deal was struck that promised to change how we all get our food. This was the birth of the World Trade Organization, and with it came this brand new rulebook for farming. The idea was to totally rewrite the rules for everything from wheat to cotton and create a new era of fair play.
But here's the big question, right? When you make a global promise to level the playing field, what actually happens on the ground? We're going to dive into what this meant for one of the world's biggest agricultural players, India, and ask, did this grand experiment really work out?
And I mean, the goal was ambitious. The official mission of the WTO's Agreement on Agriculture, or AOA for short, was to create a fair and market-oriented system. Basically, the idea was, hey governments, step back, stop meddling, and just let the market do its thing.
So, how are they planning on pulling this off? Well, the WTO built this new global rulebook on three main pillars. These were the fundamental new rules of the game that every single member country, India included, now had to play by.
And here they are. First up, market access. This meant countries had to lower the walls, the tariffs, that kept foreign products out. Second, domestic support. This was a big one. It was all about limiting the subsidies that give a country's own farmers an unfair edge. And third, export subsidies. Countries had to slash any payments that were making their products artificially cheap on the world market.
Now, the really tricky part of this whole deal was that second pillar, domestic support. It turned out to be incredibly complicated and, frankly, super controversial. The WTO basically had to invent a whole system to sort government farm spending into different categories, kind of like a traffic light for subsidies.
Okay, so first you have the amber box. Think of this as the red light. These are the subsidies that are seen as the most harmful to free trade. We're talking about things like guaranteeing prices for crops or giving out cheap fertilizer. Under the new rules, countries had to seriously cut back their spending in this box.
Then you've got the blue box, which is a little weird. It's a special case. These are also payments that distort trade, but they got a pass. They were exempt from any cuts if they were part of a program to get farmers to limit how much they produced. So it's like paying farmers not to grow too much stuff.
And finally, we have the green box. This was the green light. Go! These subsidies were considered to have little to no effect on trade. Think government funding for agricultural research or programs to protect the environment. But here's the absolute kicker. There were zero spending limits on the green box. None. So, those were the new rules of the game. The big question, of course, is, did it all work? Let's take a look at India's scorecard a couple of decades after this whole new system was put into place.
At first glance, the results look pretty good. Now, this chart looks a bit like a roller coaster, I know, with all these peaks and valleys showing India's agricultural trade. But if you ignore the year-to-year chaos for a second and just look at the overall direction, the total volume of trade was definitely heading up.
And just how much growth are we talking about? Check out this number. Between 2005 and 2014, India's agricultural exports grew at an average annual rate of over 23%. That is a massive, massive boom by any measure.
And you can see this playing out with specific crops. Take cotton, for example. In that first decade under the WTO, its production was actually shrinking every year. But in the second decade, it exploded with over 9% annual growth. And you see similar turnarounds for pulses and wheat. So, more trade, more production. Sounds like a win, right?
Well, not so fast. This is where the story gets really interesting, because the research uncovers a huge paradox. All that growth in trade didn't actually mean India was becoming more competitive on the world stage. And the reason for that? Well, it points to a billion-dollar loophole in the whole system.
And here's the heart of the problem, stated pretty bluntly in the paper itself. It says that developed countries were able to essentially create competitiveness by pouring enormous amounts of money into those subsidies that were exempt from the rules. Yep, the green box and blue box categories.
So here's the big twist. India was playing by the rules, right? It was limiting its trade-distorting amber box subsidies. But its farmers ended up having to compete against farmers in developed countries who were getting massive support from their governments, all completely legal under those green box rules that had no limits.
The system basically created a fundamentally uneven playing field. On one side, you have developing nations like India, who were stuck with strict limits on the kinds of subsidies they mostly used. But on the other side, developed nations had a totally different playbook. They could use that unlimited green box to pump billions into their farm sectors, twisting global trade while technically following the letter of the law. Okay, so if the international rules are tilted, what's the solution for a country like India? Well, the paper doesn't just point out the problem. It actually suggests a way forward.
The study concludes that the answer isn't just about fighting the rules of the WTO. It's really about building strength from the inside out. This means a complete overhaul of domestic farm policy, helping farmers move into higher value crops, and crucially, it means investing a ton in infrastructure, in technology, and in capital to make the whole sector more efficient on its own.
And all of this leaves us with a really critical final question. The story of India and the agreement on agriculture really shows how a system of rules that was designed to be market-oriented can still lead to some deeply unequal results. It really forces us to ask, in this incredibly complex global economy, what does it actually take for trade to be not just free, but genuinely fair for everyone involved?